All right, to start out the message this morning as we continue in our series we've been in, I want to give you a little quiz. I'd like to quiz you on how well you know famous doors from the movies. All right, so here's the first door right here. What's this door? Okay, Monster. Now, I was wondering, were we going to have to bring in some kids from Kids Church to get this answer? But, you know, we got some Pixar fans here. But this is a Pixar animated movie, Monsters, Inc. That's the famous door from that. Well, here's the next one. Yeah, I think I heard somebody say Lord of the Rings. Yeah, this is Bilbo Baggins' front door to his house, what became Frodo's house. So that's of the popular Lord of the Rings trilogy. All right, here's the next door. Chronicles of Narnia, I think I heard somebody say, yeah, so this is the wardrobe. Lucy, isn't that her name, that opened the door. She was the first one to kind of discover the magical land of Narnia there. All right, here's the next one. Jurassic Park, yeah, that most people got that one with no problem there. All right, and here is the last one, I think. Ghostbusters, yeah, pretty quick. Y'all were quick on the uptake. All right, good deal. There was a lot of people at the first service needed to watch some movies because they didn't really know any of these. But so in our current series, like I said, we've been looking at the famous statements or the I am claims that Jesus makes throughout the Gospel of John. And as we've been going through and looking at some of these different claims and statements, we see that as Jesus makes these claims, he is identifying how he himself, through this imagery or through the name that he describes, meets a great need in our life or meets an area of brokenness in our life. So can you guess which name we're going to look at today? Well, it's a little early there on that slide, but yeah, I am the door. That's why we were talking about doors to begin with. I am the door. Okay. All right. So as always, with any teaching of Jesus, with anything you read in Scripture, you need to know the context, especially if you're just going to take out one little phrase like this. You need to understand the context of which it was made. And so the setting here is we're going to look at this conversation that Jesus is having in which he makes this claim and describes himself this way. It comes right on the heels of Jesus having just forgiven the woman who was caught in adultery, brought before him. It comes right on the heels of him having healed the man who was born blind, and he did that on a Sabbath. Okay, so the Pharisees, who were the main religious teachers in that culture, in the Judean culture of Jesus' day, kind of the gatekeepers to all things religious, reacted pretty negatively to both of those situations. Didn't think the woman deserved any mercy and grace. Didn't think that man should have been healed because it was on the Sabbath, even though he had a great need. They basically said the rituals are more important than his need. And so it didn't sit well with them. So in these stories, we're seeing a contrast between Jesus' heart for people and sort of the Pharisees' hardened hearts in some of these areas. And so now we get to this point here in John chapter 10, verse 1, on the end of all that taking place, and he's having this conversation with the Pharisees. So John chapter 10, starting in verse 1. Jesus says, "Truly, truly, I say to you, he who does not enter the sheepfold by the door, but climbs in by another way, that man is a thief and a robber. But he who enters by the door is the shepherd of the sheep. To him the gatekeeper opens. The sheep hear his voice, and he calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he has brought out all his own, he goes before them, and the sheep follow him, for they know his voice. A stranger they will not follow, but they will flee from him, for they do not know the voice of strangers." Jesus used this figure of speech, but the Pharisees did not understand what he was saying to them. So Jesus again said to them, "Truly, truly, I say to you, I am the door of the sheep. All who came before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not listen to them. I am the door. If anyone enters by me, he will be saved, and will go in and out and find pasture." All right, so Jesus' metaphor here, obviously he's playing off of this occupation of shepherding, which was one of the three major occupations that you would have found in ancient Judea. You were either going to be a shepherd, or you were going to be a fisherman, or you were going to be a farmer, typically one of the three main things there. Now, shepherding is deeply embedded into the Middle Eastern world, the Middle Eastern culture, and really is deeply embedded to all the scriptures. You go through the Old Testament, you see God using this as a metaphor to describe his relationship with Israel over and over and over again. So Jesus is saying a lot here in just a few words. To really appreciate what Jesus is saying here, we do need to understand a little bit about ancient Judean shepherding and a little bit about sheep themselves. So, kind of after a long day of grazing would take place, the sheep were often brought back and put into a cave that had only one opening in it, or they would sort of have this makeshift little pen that they would lead the sheep into that, again, only had one opening in it. And so the shepherd would then, especially at night, would stand or lay across the opening so that, he would be the guard, be the barrier between whatever was outside of the pen or the cave and the sheep, to be the one who is going to either let something in or not let it in, or let it out or not, that kind of thing. Now, sheep get a bad rap for being dumb, right? I mean, when people often talk about sheep, they talk about how dumb of an animal it is. But they're actually really intelligent animals. They kind of get a bad rap, or they get this idea they're not the brightest bulb in the pack because they've got this flocking instinct. So they will just follow one another wherever. So people think, well, they're just following blindly. They're not even paying attention to where they go. And there have been cases where that flocking instinct, where one would walk off a cliff and all the others would just follow right behind. So you kind of see why people think, well, they're not a smart animal. But again, they are really intelligent. That's just kind of a survival strategy they use, and it does serve them well in most cases. But you can't deny, sheep will sometimes do things that kind of just leave you scratching your head. Watch this. So, now, I will say this. Who does Jesus most often compare his followers to? That doesn't say much for us. All right. Now, but one trait or characteristic that sheep have that is pretty impressive is their ability to discern between voices. Their ability to discern their shepherd's voice. Sometimes, especially in these settings, in the ancient Judean settings, multiple flocks would be placed into one pen. So when the shepherd would call out to a sheep, even if they were mixed in with a bunch that weren't his, only his sheep would respond. The others would stay put. And they'd even done kind of tests with this where if you dressed, even if you took some of the clothes of that shepherd and put them on and tried to imitate their voice, it was really hard to fool the sheep. They just knew the voice. And again, at night, the shepherd's main responsibility was to guard the door of the pen, to guard the entrance of the pen, to guard against thieves, to guard against wild animals, and to keep silly sheep from wandering off. So it's clear to see in this passage we read, especially in verse 1, Jesus is saying to the Pharisees, they're like the thieves. They're like the robbers who are trying to climb in over the wall and lead the sheep astray and steal the sheep away from the true shepherd. But those with ears to hear, they have that discerning hearing. Those with eyes to see, like the woman who was forgiven, like the man who was now healed. Okay, they recognize that Jesus is the true shepherd. They follow him. They know that he is the only way they are going to be led into God's pasture. They know he is the only way they're going to be led back to God and be able to have a right relationship with him again. So how does Jesus, being the door in our modern day context, how does him being the door meet us at an area of our deepest need or our brokenness in those ways? Well, the first one's kind of obvious. He is the only door to salvation. He's the only door to salvation. I know it's much more popular and acceptable in our culture today, and this illustration is often used, that God is like a mountain. And you think about a mountain. There's lots of roads that you can take to go up a mountain, lots of different paths that you could take to get to the top of the mountain. So lots of different ways you can go, but in the end, you reach the same destination. And that's the way a lot of people think about the major world religions, is that there's some small differences here or there, but ultimately they lead you to the same place. I've got my way, you've got your way. We may call them by different names. We've got maybe a little bit different rules, but usually you'll end up at the same place. That's a popular idea. Now that idea may sound good. It may feel good in certain ways, but Jesus said, I am the door. He didn't say, I am a door, or I am one door among many. I am the door. I am the way to salvation. He would make it really emphatic later on when he said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. Some might say, well, this sounds mean, this sounds arrogant, this sounds intolerant to say that, but not if it's true. We're not in charge of the door. God is in charge. But I think this is important for us. I think we need to think about this a certain way. As Christians who live in a world with many different religions. Now, I know in our little bubble here in eastern North Carolina, maybe we don't cross paths with a lot of folks from different the major world religions in those ways, but we live in a world filled with it. So I do think it is sort of lazy or shallow of us just to kind of throw a talking point out and think everything is settled and not be able to have a conversation with someone about why we believe what we believe is true. Let's go back to that mountain illustration again that's often used. So you can say like at the base of the mountain, so at the base level, below the dotted line there, you will find a lot of similarities amongst the major world religions on some basic teachings. You'll find some things that are the same. Jesus said, do to others as you would have them do to you. Buddha said, consider others as yourself. You'll see some similar teachings amongst the other religions as well, usually about how maybe some ways to live your life, how to treat other people, basic kind of morality things. You'll see some similarities there at the very bottom base level. But after you move past those base level teachings above the dotted line there, well, you arrive at the top and you're not on the same mountain anymore. You're on a completely different mountain. Most people don't usually look too deeply into the beliefs of each religion, kind of just accept the talking point. All roads lead to God, especially the most important thing is you just be sincere in what you believe. But if anyone takes the time to really look at them, they'll see huge contradictory differences between them. You can't have God saying he's one God, as in Judaism, Islam, and Christianity, but have thousands of God in Hinduism and no God at all in Buddhism. You can't say Jesus is the Son of God and Savior of the world who died on the cross to forgive the sins of mankind, as Christianity teaches, but then have Islam say, well, Jesus is not the Son of God. He's not divine. He was just a human being. He was a good teacher. He was a good prophet, but definitely not the Son of God, and he was never crucified on a cross for sins. Or have Judaism say that Jesus was a failed false prophet who claimed to be the Messiah, but he wasn't the Messiah. And they're still waiting for a promised Messiah who they say is not going to be divine in any way, just a good human leader. And that's not even scratching the surface of what each of these world faiths say about heaven and eternity and how one reaches eternity. These beliefs are not just slightly different, they're contradictory. Okay? When it comes to the fundamental teachings of the various world faiths, either they're all wrong or only one of them's right, because they can't all be true at the same time, because they all make contradictory claims about the most important issues. Now, at this point, nothing's been proven, okay? And just pointing this out, nothing's been proven as far as, okay, well, which one's right? And it does raise the question, why do Christians believe they are the only right way? They are the only way back to God. They are the only way of salvation. And this is where we have a responsibility. This is where we need to be able to have conversations and talk to people about why we believe the Scriptures are the inspired Word of God, why they are accurate, why they are true, how they have been handed down accurately through the centuries to what we have today. This is where we do need to be able to talk with others about the historical reliability of the crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus, that there are so much good evidence to believe this actually happened. The main reason I believe Jesus is the only way to salvation is because he was crucified on the cross, he died, and he walked out alive from the grave 3 days later. And there's so much proof that helps me to trust and believe in that. So if he did that, I'm going to believe anything he said. And he said, I am the only way, that I am the door. But again, I would say, it's lazy or shallow or irresponsible of us just to think, well, I'm just going to throw out a talking point, or I'm going to throw out a verse, and that settles it. We need to be able to have conversations that explain why we believe what we believe is true. And we don't do this just to prove somebody wrong. We don't do this just to win an argument. We put the work in here so that hopefully we can be prepared to have meaningful conversations with others who maybe just don't know these things or think wrongly about some things, just to be able to have conversations. There's a really well-written book. It's called They Like Jesus But Not the Church. It was written by a guy named Dan Kimball. And one of the chapters in his book specifically deals with this issue, it's kind of like some common objections, and that is how arrogant it is for Christians to claim that they're the only right religion. They're the only right way to God, the only right way to be saved. And so through this book, he interviewed different people, came from different backgrounds, and there's one guy he interviewed who wouldn't say that he is a total Hindu, but kind of leans towards that. But I thought it was interesting. I read some comments that he made in the interview, and I want to share them with you. So he said, if Christians claim to be the only way, then they should be able to articulate and dialogue with us about why they hold that Christianity is the one true religion. I don't want to lecture, I want to sit and talk. And I want them to show me why they don't think that all faiths and all spiritual expressions are valid. Not just spout off a verse, but give me some reasons so I understand them and why they believe what they believe. I would respect them more if they did, but all I normally get is a quick Bible verse and a Jesus is the only way answer. We should not be ashamed to share and teach the claim that Jesus made, that he is the only way, he is the door. But we also shouldn't be lazy and shallow and prepare ourselves to be able to have conversations with others about why we believe what we believe is true. It's kind of like Peter, what Peter told the churches when he wrote to them. He said, in your hearts revere Christ as Lord. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have. And he said, do this with gentleness, though. Do it with respect so that you keep a clear conscience, no matter how it goes. Second thing here, Jesus' claim to be the door brings a promise of protection, a promise of a meaningful life. Look at verse 8 again. All who came before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not listen to them. I am the door. If anyone enters by me, he will be saved and will go in and out and find pasture. You think about it. The life of a sheep is a dangerous life, right? Especially out in the wild. Not only are there, especially in Jesus' day, not only were there thieves who wanted to come in and steal the sheep, but you also had wild animals who wanted to make them a meal. And like a good ancient Judean shepherd, this imagery Jesus is using, Jesus lays out his body. Remember how they would lay across the opening of the pen? They would be there at that opening of the cave or the pen. And he's there between what's outside the pen and what's in the pen. I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on this because we will kind of get into the idea of the Good Shepherd in another message in this series, but think about this. Do you know how much comfort it would bring us if we lived every day with the assurance that nothing comes through the door of that pen without His permission. Psalm 84:11 says, "No good thing does He withhold from those whose walk is blameless." There's a lot of meaning to that, kind of two sides of meaning to that. That means if He withholds it, it's not good for us, even if we think it's a good thing. There are a lot of good things in this world that for us as individuals may not be good for us because we can't handle it. Because if He did let us experience that in our life, we would make it an idol. We would make it more important than Him. So he could see how it's not a good thing, and so maybe there's situations where He withholds that. But there's also means that there are things that if He's the shepherd, if He's there and controls in His sovereignty what comes into the pen and what doesn't, that means that there are things He will allow into pen that we see as bad, but He wants to use as good. That He wants to use as good in our lives. Now, when I say that Jesus gives us a promise of protection, here's what I do not mean. I do not mean God promises us a life of comfort and all of our heart's desires fulfilled. It doesn't mean that if we just believe hard enough, if we just have enough faith, then that guarantees we'll always get the job, we'll always get the pay raise, we'll always experience the healing, the relationships will always work out. Anyone who tells you that following Jesus means that, or that it guarantees that your life will be easy, that you'll have every hope of your heart fulfilled, that it guarantees that, they are lying to you. They are false teachers. Jesus' disciples, His hand-picked disciples, did not experience a life of ease and having every hope in their life fulfilled. What He promised, what He showed them, what He demonstrated with His own life, is that all of it could be used for good if they remain faithful. For example, Jesus told Simon Peter, "Simon, Satan has asked to sift all of you as wheat." In other words, Simon, Satan has asked permission to come into the pen and mess up your life, to shake up your life. And we would think at this point Jesus would say, "And I have forbidden it because I am the good shepherd." But instead Jesus says this, "But I have prayed for you, Simon, that your faith may not fail." Jesus is telling Peter, Satan has been given permission to enter the pen, and he is going to shake you up. He is going to mess with you. He is going to try to shake your confidence in me as the Messiah. And I have prayed that your faith would grow stronger as a result. I am not going to keep you, Peter, from this trial, from this pain. But I promise, if you remain faithful, good can come from it. What if we went through life with that confidence? That at the door of the sheep pen of our life is an all-knowing, all-powerful, all-seeing shepherd who will not let anything pass that He does not promise to use for our good if we remain faithful. If we truly believe that, it would change how we approach any trial in this life. Yes, people will hurt us. Yes, people are going to disappoint us. Yes, we're going to fail at things. Yes, our health will fail. But none of that should overwhelm us if we truly believe that the shepherd is there. What if we went through life with that confidence?